Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first series of 21st Century English Teacher Express webinar series. This is the webinar initiated by British Council in partnership with Peartree Languages and English Academy, powered by Bank Guru. My name is Aladi Fitra, and I'm the English Program Coordinator at the British Council Indonesia and will be the host for today's webinar. In this one webinar, we are going to explore the topic of planning lessons and courses with the experts from Peartree Languages. Before we proceed to our webinar for today, I would like to read some housekeeping for our webinars. This session is being recorded and live streamed on British Council Teaching English Asia Facebook. By attending, you acknowledge that your comments may be recorded and rebroadcasted. If you would like to ask some questions, please type them in the Q&A box and on Zoom or chat box on Facebook. Last but not the least, at the end of the session, you will be given a link to complete a post-event survey. Link to download e-certificate will be provided after you submit your feedback. Before we proceed to our sessions, I would like to invite Nikki as the owner and manager of Peartree Languages. Nikki, the virtual screen is yours.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much. Very nice to be here. I'm just going to share my screen for a moment. I hope that everybody can see that. Brilliant. Adi, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very warm welcome and hello, everybody, to all of our participants. I am Nikki Partridge. I am the General Manager of Peartree Languages. We are an English language training courses services provider located in Cardiff in the United Kingdom. We are accredited by the British Council and we have been operating since 2005. So we are really delighted to be able to be here today to share the experience of our team. Most recently, we've been working on a number of all of the prelim projects, in fact, and also on a digital innovation grant called Nusantara Go with British Council Indonesia. And soon we will be starting our 7 Seas teacher development project in northern Vietnam, which also raises themes of climate action. So I'd really like to give a big thank you to the British Council Indonesia for organizing this series of webinars and for inviting Peartree to take part. If you would like to find out a little bit more about Peartree, please do add us on any of the social media links that you see on this slide. We would really like to keep in touch with you. So I would just like to tell you as well a little bit about this series that you're going to be enjoying. Welcome aboard the 21st Century English Teacher Express. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour around 8 stations of knowledge that are necessary to be an effective English language teacher. So we'll be exploring various themes. We'll be providing examples from our own experience for teachers of primary and secondary. There'll be 8 sessions. We'll be kicking off with our first 2 sessions today, but we really do recommend that you attend all the stops on this journey to have the full experience. There'll be lots of information in each of our knowledge stations, and there'll also be a Q&A with the trainer and the co-trainer. But do remember, this is just a taster. So we would love you to carry on sharing, exploring, experimenting with your own best practice after the session. So to do this, please do join our community of practice on Padlet. You can do that by scanning the QR code that you can see in front of you, where we hope you'll be able to share ideas with other international teachers. If you do join us, and we really hope you do, please be sure to stick to the code of conduct so that we can make a safe space for all. So I think that's enough from me. It gives me great pleasure to be able to hand over now to our wonderful trainers. And once again, I'd like to thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Nikki, for the very warm welcome remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, before I invite our wonderful trainers, I'd like to remind you that today we are going to have 2 sessions, which the first session to start from 2 to 3 p.m. and there will be 15-minute breaks after that before we go on to the second session, which will be started at 3:15 until 4:15 Jakarta time. So please don't go anywhere and continue join us until the second sessions. Okay, now I would like to give the first chance to Anna to present the presentation. Anna, the virtual screen is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. Okay, I'm just going to share my screen, everybody, and hopefully you can see it. Is it all good? You can see it, Adi? Yep. And
All
here?
good.
Yep, brilliant, perfect. So really excited and delighted to have so many people joining us. First of all, I'm Anna Kucher. I'm in the UK at the moment, so it's morning over here. And we are going to be looking at understanding learners. I used to work for the British Council, but I teach and train and work in state schools in the UK. I work for a multi-academy trust called United Learning and also Teach First, which is an educational charity. And I'm really lucky that I get to go in and out of other teachers' classrooms all the time. And I've been in hundreds of thousands, well, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and thousands of classrooms over the last 30 years. And so I'm really delighted to sort of share the expertise that I've had from that in talking about understanding learners. So we'll move straight on. First of all, just to think about where this sits in the British Council framework of practice and what we're going to be doing. We're in this second area, so we've got sort of 12 areas of quality in the classroom, and thinking about how understanding learners is going to link into all the other things. It will certainly link into lesson planning and course planning, but also in how you manage your classes and to how you assess students and every single aspect of teaching, in fact. So I'd like you to be thinking about all of the different, these different areas, keeping them in mind. One moment, just trying to move my slide, which has just stopped. Oh, here we go. There we go. So I would like you to think in the first instance about your students. So there's a picture here on the left. I'd like you to try to imagine a learner or a class of learner and to think about the answers to some questions. And those questions are, how well do you actually know your learners? So if you're thinking about them, if you had to describe them to another teacher, could you paint an accurate picture of the individuals in your class? Do you know their hobbies? Do you know about their family? Do you know what their favorite subject at school is? If you're teaching younger learners, they may be coming to you for English, but maybe they've just had chemistry or physics or another subject. They might like that a lot more than languages. So how much do you really know your students? So try to picture right now, maybe if you've got a piece of paper and a pen, write down the name of a couple of your students and bring them to mind during this webinar. And what we want to think about is the depth of understanding. So we've got quite a lot of areas to consider, and you can have a look at this screen, obviously, as it's up. There are the obvious things like how old somebody is, because their age affects their life experience, which is also another one of these areas. Whether they're male or female, whether they're quite a shy person or very outgoing, thinking about abilities or disabilities or neurodiversities or anything that might create more of a challenge in the classroom. What resources does a student have? What's their social background? Do they come from a family where tech is not a problem because they have plenty of money? Or maybe they come from a less wealthy background. What nationality are they? Their religions, their beliefs, etc. Other languages. We can think about their aptitude. Some people are good at languages quite naturally, and other people find it a lot more difficult. Some people have traveled a lot. Other people have not left their town or the area where they live, especially if it's a younger learner. Current circumstances. Things happen in our lives. So every day, different things happen. You may have issues in your family. There may be somebody who is unwell. There may be a wedding going on. There may be a new baby, a new pet, boyfriend, girlfriend. All of these things will really impact how our learners behave and how they are in the classroom. We'll look in more depth in a moment about motivation and their reasons for studying, but also thinking about what support do they have? Do they have support from siblings? Do they have support from parents? Are there other people that are going to be able to help them with their language learning? And then we've also got thinking about their academic ability, their study skills, learning preferences, their previous learning. If somebody has had a really good experience, they're going to be very positive. If they've had a negative experience and they didn't enjoy their lessons, that might impact as well how they are in the classroom. So thinking about that student, maybe you wrote down their name, ask yourself, do I know the answers to all of these questions about each of my students? And some of you maybe teach many students. Certainly people in the state sector, you might have multiple classes with many students. So how much do you know about them and how quickly can you find this information? So thinking about your classroom environment, and I'm aware that you come from many different places, many different contexts. So some of you might be teaching in a large classroom. You may not be able to move the desks, or maybe you're teaching in a smaller language school, a private school. Perhaps you're teaching online. Do students actually know each other? Do they meet each other physically? Do they have their cameras on? Are they able to use their microphone? All of these things will affect their learning environment. And additionally, oh, we've just gone one too far. We're going to think about the actual context for learning. So their context for learning will make quite a difference as well. So even just how you get to school. Is it a stressful journey? Is it an easy journey? Certainly, I know my children sometimes used to arrive at school and everything was great. Other times we had a very stressful time getting to school. Where is the school? Or maybe it's not a physical building, maybe it's an iPad, a tablet, some other device, even a telephone, depending how they're accessing the lesson. The time of day and the day of the week and how long a lesson is will also change how your students behave in class. How often do you have lessons with them? If you see a class 3 or 4 times a week, then you're going to know them really well. If you only see them once every 2 weeks, and maybe then a student is absent, you might not see a student for an entire month, and this will impact your understanding of your learner and your opportunities to get to know them. How long is the course? Is it an academic year? Is it a shorter course? Is it over multiple years? Is there an exam at the end? What's the assessment goal? And thinking about the numbers of students in the class and the room layout, the seating arrangement. Sometimes students are sat next to somebody that they really get on well with and they feel comfortable with. And then maybe one day that person is absent and that affects how they are in class. Or they might be with somebody they're less comfortable with. Do they like you, the teacher? Do they have other teachers? Do they know you? Do you share something personal about yourself as well, so that it's reciprocal, that it's just not, you're just not just the teacher, but maybe they know what your hobby is, what your favorite football team is, if you have any pets. What resources and technology do you have? And their knowledge of techniques. So if you're going to use a particular methodology in class, a particular way of teaching, is that new, or have they done it many times before? Overall, what is the climate for learning like? This is one of the first things that I look for when I go in and assess teachers in the class. I want to be able to write positive climate for learning, that somebody uses their students' names, that they make them feel comfortable, and that everybody really wants to be in the room. And that is created by the teacher, the peer group, all of the students in the room. Off the basis of that, you'll also be thinking about how autonomous they are. Is there any work? There are so many factors that we need to consider, and all of these things impact students. When you're experienced, these things just happen naturally, but if you're a new teacher, you maybe need to deliberately consider some of these things. How can you find this information out? So this is a really key part. Obviously, a first thing you could do is just to have a questionnaire. You could put this in the student's native language if their English is not very good. And you can literally just ask them a few facts and things about their lives to collect this information. You could send out a survey to parents. Again, depending on technology, you could use a Microsoft form and you could write the questions, send it to everybody, and it will collect the information, and then you'll make an Excel spreadsheet and you'll have everything in one place. Or you can simply write something on a paper or photocopy something and send it to parents and say, please, can you give me some information? Some schools use what we call data drops. Data drops are where a school collects particularly assessment or test information. So if you are teaching students in their third year of learning English, maybe there are 2 years before in which they were learning, and there should be 2 years of data. Usually schools tend to collect data every 2 to 3 months, and whenever they do a little test, they just put that data into a database, and then you can have a look. So that will also tell you about your students' progress, because getting to know your learners, understanding their motivation, will be seeing, are they getting better? Are they at the same place? Are they getting worse? Is there something happening in their life that is impacting their learning? Just talking to students informally is really important. In the classroom, outside the classroom, many teachers, particularly in primary and secondary school, like to welcome their students by being on the door of their classroom and just saying hello. And that's a great thing to do. If you're online, if you join a little bit early, some students might join early and you can say, hello, how are you? What did you do at the weekend? Just try and find out a little bit. Watching students and observing them. So if you're online, opportunities to be in breakout rooms, looking at how students interact. If you're in the face-to-face classroom, just monitoring while students are getting on with tasks and seeing what they're doing. And the really important thing is liaising. I'm often surprised, particularly in large schools where there are many teachers who teach the same students, that they don't talk to each other. So maybe have a coffee with a maths teacher or a geography teacher and talk about the students, and you might see them in a completely different way. Talk to anybody else that knows the learners. So moving on to the next part, thinking about how you can gather this data. Most schools, in fact, all schools normally for safeguarding, will have a register where you've just got the dates and the names. And one of the simplest things that you can do, which I'm also going to ask you to do at the end of this webinar, is make this register more useful. So you can actually add columns to this, and there's a link at the end of the webinar as well for a lady called Jennifer Gonzalez, who has some of these handouts available on her website. And you can think about, what could you ask? And this will depend on the age of your learners and how well you know them and what you want to know about them. So you can just have their name on here, but you can also ask them, some information about family, what activities they do, what's their best subject, a few extra things. And you can also hand out questionnaires. So for example, this one asks a student where they prefer to sit in the classroom, what their biggest strength in school is, not just in English, but in school, in subjects, what they like about school or they don't like. So collecting this data can be really useful. And if you have it on a register, which can either be a physical piece of paper that you keep with you, or even better, if you are able to use an online system, then you can go back and you can add to this. This is an example of what this could look like. This is a class that I taught previously. Now you might think, I can't collect all of this data for all of my students. I have too many students. So what I'm suggesting is, in your first lesson, or even before a course starts, you can ask students to complete this for themselves. But normally what I like to do is, in the first lesson, I ask students to complete a form like this for their friend. So a different student will have filled in Stephanie's form for her. And she's written as much detail as she can. And there's also some extra information in pencil. And this is because I collect this information. So for example, here, this is a class, and I've got all of their bits of paper, all of the forms, and I keep this every lesson I teach. If I learn something new, I might add it to the student's form. So one lesson when we were working, I found out that this student had been to Tokyo in Japan, and I added that to her form. Obviously with her date of birth, I was able to find out her zodiac information and add that. She didn't tell me the names of her friends, but I noticed in class that she liked working with Scarlett and Imogen. So this was information that I was able to collect. It's also really useful if you can have a photographic register, for example, of your students, so that you've got pictures and they're real people and not just numbers. We need to think also about motivation. Why are students learning? Now, older students may well be learning because they have no choice. They want to get qualifications. They're thinking about their possible career. Maybe they want to get a promotion. They want to get more money, a better job. Younger students, maybe less so, more the beginning one here. But also there are sometimes you're lucky with integrative motivation. Maybe somebody has a relationship with an English speaker, and that doesn't mean they have to be boyfriend, girlfriend. Maybe they have an aunt, a cousin, somebody else, a connection to the English speaking environment. Maybe there is a reason why they really want to use English. Perhaps they have a love of culture, books, or film, or even they're learning language as a hobby. Now, these motivations are very easy to find in adults, but they're much harder to find in children, especially as children don't always know why they're learning, and they also often don't have a choice about learning. And that's when you need to provide this. Now, think about some questions. I'd like you to think, what made you get out of bed this morning? Okay, what was the reason? It could be the alarm clock, it could be a pet, it could be because you have no choice, you're going to work, but what is it that motivates you to get out of bed in the morning? Think about what makes you tick. Tick is the noise of a clock. It goes tick tock, tick tock, tick tock. So what keeps you like a clock or like your watch, you can hear it. What makes you continue all the time? That's a common phrase we use. What makes you tick? What also or who inspires you? Is there a famous person? Is there a member of your family, somebody who you have a lot of admiration for, who really inspires you and makes you think, life is good, life is worth living, I really like this person? Have you got a passion, something that really interests you or excites you, a hobby? And what keeps you going when things are tough, when life is difficult, when you have a bad day? How do you carry on doing things? What makes things exciting? Now, these questions are things that maybe you know in your head, but you don't think about. And all of these things are linked to some wonderful work by a man called Peter Benson. And I really recommend this book. And he's written a book called Sparks. And I'd like to explain to you a bit about what sparks are, because this is relevant to all kinds of teaching. If you look at this little diagram, and I've got in front of me here now a box of matches and a match. This match has some potential here, okay? But it's not going to do anything unless I actually strike it. And if I strike it, it's going to burn, but for a really short time. This match will go out in a few minutes or seconds. If I want to light something, I need another thing. For example, I've got a candle, so I could light the candle. And if I want this to continue burning, I need something to make it continue burning. I need oxygen. I need the fuel. So that, blow it out, the start of this process, when we turn this match, we strike it and we get a flame, that is called a spark. And Peter Benson discusses how sparks are things that give your life a purpose, an interest, a passion, a gift, something you can kind of feel it. It makes you feel a little bit excited. Maybe you feel it in your hands. Maybe you feel it that you're ready for action. You're excited. And it could be a skill or a talent. It could be a commitment, for example, to the environment, or a quality. So something that makes you passionate. I'm really lucky. For me, what makes me feel excited is teaching, which is why it's a hobby and not just a job. And that's something that I really enjoy doing. I'm quite good at cooking. Sometimes that's a spark for me, and it can make me feel really enthusiastic. And these are things that we need to help, particularly children, to find. What do you love? What are you passionate about? And how can we as a teacher support that? Now, we might be an English teacher with a student that doesn't like languages, but maybe that student loves the natural world. Maybe they love geography. Maybe we can teach an English lesson about volcanoes. Maybe we can teach a lesson about music, which includes their favorite musician or something that they do. Maybe we can reference their skill or talent. And what Peter Benson talks about is how we can be what he calls spark champions as teachers. So he says the best way to get success, which is passion, which is motivation, is find the spark. So ask yourself the question, what gets you up in the morning? What makes you tick like that watch? So tick, tick, tock, what keeps that going? What makes you enthusiastic? Find people that are going to support that. So if a student is good at languages, we need to support that and say, well done, brilliant, excellent. Maybe there is a friend that is going to be supportive as well. Maybe an aunt, an uncle, somebody in the community. We as teachers need to give opportunities to practice, to use the language and exposure. And if we can do these regularly, we get success and a student that is passionate and is thriving. So I would ask you to try to really think, particularly if you're working with young learners, what is it that makes them excited? And you need to use that in your classroom. We have to help create motivation as well. With younger learners, we said they don't always know why they're learning, what the point of their learning is. So we need to think about how we can make them feel good in class. Obviously, we can use a lot of praise and recognition. We can use their names, making things relevant, making things personal. Many course books do not connect with students because they talk about people the students don't know. They have names in there which are not names that the students know. They have places that the students might not know. So how can we adapt this? How can we think about planning to make it more relevant and personal? Can we create lots of opportunities for teamwork and sharing? This is a real motivating factor when you can help your friends do well, do something together. Can we set class and individual goals? Most importantly, can we be passionate ourselves? So teaching is a really important job, but sometimes we wake up and we don't feel good. We feel a bit low, a bit sad. The weather's terrible. We're not happy. But when we teach, we need to find some enthusiasm. And it's brilliant that you're all on these webinars because that shows that you're already motivated and you're hopefully becoming and continuing to be enthusiastic about teaching, which is absolutely fantastic. So your students are lucky. We've got all this information. What else do we have to know? If we are teaching an individual lesson, we've also got to think about what the students' needs are and how can we find those out and collect them. And if we've got a particular lesson in mind, maybe we're going to be doing a reading lesson, we need to know, Are they good at reading? Do they know the difference between reading for detail, reading for gist? Are they able to understand multiple meanings of words? What stage of learning are they at? Their readiness. So some students in the same class will be very ready. They may have many skills, and other students are not quite ready for certain things. So we need to adapt. And we'll be talking about that in a future webinar when we look at inclusion as well. And we also need to think about their schematic knowledge, the background knowledge, the knowledge of life, the knowledge of things that you bring to the classroom. That's important too, because it helps you with your learning. So finding out more about needs, we need to do a needs analysis. Now, good schools will sometimes do this for you, but if it isn't done, you need to think about, why am I doing a needs analysis? When and how can I do it? What do we ask? Who do we give it to? And what do we do with the information? So a needs analysis is what it says on the packet. We are finding out what our students need and why, so that we can give them what they need. So we need to know, do they need more support with pronunciation or listening? Is there a particular vocabulary or grammar area that is problematic? Ideally, we can do this at the beginning or even before a course starts. But it's also a good idea to repeat a needs analysis. Maybe at the end of 6 weeks, do it again. At the end of the term or semester, do it again. At the end of the academic year, do it again. And ask the questions to find out what things they think are easy, difficult, what they need to know. We can give this to students, but we can also give this to parents or people who have taught the students in the past. So last year's teacher could tell you straight away, this class found a particular area difficult, so maybe you need to spend more time on that. And we use our information to help us choose how to teach, what to teach. Now, maybe we have a course book, but maybe there are some pages in that book that we know are quite easy for our students, and it would be better to spend more time in a particular unit. And maybe one unit we don't need to look at all, we can ignore it. And you can give out individual needs analysis. This is an example if you were doing a private lesson where you could ask a student all of this information, and this collects that data to help you understand them again about families and pets and interests and books and things and all of this, and their motivation and how they like to learn and what's easy and difficult. And again, you need to translate this into your language so that you can get really accurate data. But if you don't have time or you're not able to give out a questionnaire to all learners, what you can do, again, in one of your first lessons, is just open your course book, look at the first chapter where it tells you all of the different units and the topics. Just ask students to look at it and say, which topics do you think look most interesting? Is there something here that looks easy or looks difficult? And start to create more of a picture again. I'm only going to talk really briefly about learning preferences, and that's because there's a whole other webinar to think about learning preferences. And some people don't agree that these really impact in the classroom. But I think most of us who've been teaching for a long time can say that we have some students that prefer to learn by talking. Some people prefer to learn by looking at things, listening, studying something in depth, using our hands. There are lots of words: auditory, listening, kinesthetic with your hands, visual. It is worth considering your learning preference, because that will impact how you teach, and thinking about students and trying to use a variety of different styles so that you're not always starting every single lesson with a picture or every lesson with some sort of listening. So trying to have some adaptation, some variety in that. So we've already covered many, many things. thinking about how you can make your lessons personal right from the start. So this is an example, hopefully everybody can see. We've got an example here. You might think, what is this? Well, I'll show you here. If I show you the next slide, the next picture, you can see that that was a fingerprint. Okay, somebody's fingerprint. And one thing that you can do with students, which is quite good fun, especially if you've got younger students, is you can take that fingerprint and you can photocopy your fingerprint and make it bigger. And then you can actually create a little thing where the students write about themselves with some personal information. And you can maybe display that on the classroom wall. You don't have to use the photocopy and the fingerprint. You can draw it in the sand. They can draw around their finger. They can draw around their whole hand if it's a younger child, or you can give them a template and just write some personal information which you can share with the class. Another thing you can use is also there are different apps, and I will show you a link to one at the very end of the webinar. This is using a word cloud, a Wordle, and you put some keywords. So here you can see some keywords about my life, some of my hobbies. You might notice here I have got twin girls. I've also got a son. We've got many pets. We've got a parrot, we've got cats, hamsters, fish. My husband is Italian. One of my hobbies is making classroom materials because I really enjoy doing it, cooking. You can input these words and it creates a personalized word cloud. And this is a really nice thing to do. My son had one of these again made by his primary school. So I'm just holding it up to the camera now. You can see he had one with his name, and then he used this as his kind of bookmark that he kept in his school book, and it had some key information about him. And that's nice because it stays on the desk, and when the teacher walks around, they can see some key things. They can see the student's name, they can see a few facts about them. So that's quite a nice idea for personalization. Another thing is, again, we'll send links to this, but photocopies where you can ask another student to fill this in for their friend, and you end up with a completed backpack where they've written in, for example, the one that I'm looking at now tells me that the student liked rock music, they like books about adventure, they like meeting with friends to do sport, and it tells me the countries that they've visited, hobbies. And this is a really lovely thing to do with primary school children as well. Again, we'll send a link. You can give out a little bag, and again, you could put this in your first language so that the parents can help. So at the start of the course, they put some ideas in a bag. If things are too big, so some things are small, for example, my bag, I could put in it chocolate, I could put in it books to think about the fact that I love reading, but maybe I could put in a photograph because I can't bring my cat to school or put my cat in a bag. So I could just put a photograph in, or a photograph of brother or sister. This happens to be my son, Max, that I was talking about. So photographs or objects in a bag to share with other students is a fun way of getting to know you. And another simple thing you can do is using something like a Johari window, and we'll put a link. This is something that you can draw in class very easily. Again, you could use just like something like a mini whiteboard where you can just write it, or a piece of paper, and you're looking at collecting information to find out what students have in common with each other. This is obviously a good English language exercise as well, but these are all personalization things that are going to help you find out more. All of this and links to this will be at the end of the webinar. If you are feeling very clever, you can use the data you've collected to personalize worksheets. So this is a teacher training worksheet about ways of reading, but I asked my students before what books they like to read. So I've got a photograph of a book that a student told me they like to read. I've got a picture of somebody's Instagram account. So this is a personal handout. And when I'm looking at some grammar, my students' names are in the grammar sentences because I've typed them out. And if you have a template on your computer, it's quite quick to just change, for example, just the students' names. That's going to make it a lot more personal, makes it more motivating, and the students feel that that they are important to you. Thinking about knowing what will motivate as well. Think about, can you give them posters to say, well done, great work? Again, if you've got access to photographs or just putting their name, there are lots of sites on the internet that will give you this kind of information. You can use a marble jar. Again, I've got one here. So marbles are really nice for students. You can add, every time you see something good that happens in the class, add marbles to your jar. And this is going to, as they get up here, they get to do different activities. Now, this is for a very young class, obviously, and probably you don't want to decorate biscuits with a really big class, but you choose what you put in each step. And this is when you see good behavior in class and you can motivate them. A really simple technique that I like is just using what we call raffle tickets. So in a raffle book, you have the same tickets on both sides. And what I do is I pull off my tickets. So here, I keep these tickets. These ones I'm going to give to students. So I'm going to, if I hear some excellent pronunciation, I'm just going to say, well done, put this on the desk. Another student, maybe they arrived on time and they had all the right equipment, brilliant, put this on the desk. I'm going to ask students to collect raffle tickets. Many students like to put them in the back of their phone case or in their pencil case. And depending on the age of the students, after 2 or 3 weeks, what then happens is I take all of these tickets, I mix them all up. I'm going to put them in a little bag and keep it secret. And then I'm going to take out a ticket and say, right, this is a winning ticket, 182, you have won a prize. And it might be that they get to choose what homework the class is doing, or maybe I'm going to give them some sweets or something similar. And in fact, sweets are a very common and popular prize. So these are things that can motivate. Okay, so I've coming to the end of my session now, and I'd like to set you a couple of challenges. I would like to suggest that you consider printing or writing out a class register and add some extra columns to it so that you can collect that Spark data and think about how you can make it completely relevant to your students. And we've got the QR code for the Padlet, so you can put it on the Padlet, and then we will be able to see what you have produced and share it. If you want to go further and do something more difficult, you can try to take a piece of material that you use often, maybe a small vocabulary exercise or a grammar exercise, and add the names of your students. I'd like to show also that there is more information in the Continuing Professional Development booklet from the British Council, the Framework for Teachers. There's a whole area on understanding learners and what it contains. So you can look at that to recap, to go over again what we've thought about. And there are also some links which will explain things. So I've put a video link to Peter Benson, the American, who is sadly, he's died now, he's no longer alive, but he has a great talk about what sparks are. We've got some British Council material about learning styles. Jennifer Gonzalez thinking about building relationships to understand your students, what you could add to that register, thinking about how you motivate people that are not motivated, needs analysis and how to do that. And finally, there is a link to a particular website called Monkey Learn, where you can very easily make word clouds. And I think we are at the end of my whistle-stop tour. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hopefully everybody can see. And that's the end of this section. And I think we're going to move on. Addy, we're going to move on to the question and answer.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for a wonderful presentations, understanding the learners, starting from motivation, doing need analysis for them until personalized from the outset. That was really great. I personally find it really interesting and amazing. Well, we have arrived at the Q&A sessions, and I would like to invite everyone. If you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. While waiting for the question from the audience, there is one question from Facebook. That's how to give additional support to a student without offending them.
Without offending them, yeah, that's a good question. I think it's about being really aware of all the students in your class and also having a really positive climate for mistakes and errors. So when you say support, for example, maybe they have an issue with their pronunciation or their grammar. So for me, I like to sort of try to celebrate mistakes. So what I would maybe go over is, well, first of all, I think if students work in small groups and not by themselves, I don't, for example, Addie, if you were working with Susie, I could say Addie and Susie had this problem. I'm sure other people have it. So we're going to share the problem. Or I think saying things really positive, like that is a brilliant mistake. It's really useful. I'm really happy you made that mistake, because then we can use that mistake and we can do something with it. You come to English class to learn. If your English is perfect, I can't teach you anything. So I want you to make mistakes. I don't have a job if you're great. So it's all good. It's all positive. So I would say things like that. I can see Susie nodding because I know that I've worked with Susie as well. And we have to get people being positive about it. I think it's about knowing individuals and also looking for opportunities when the same student doesn't need support and you can help them. And actually, it's very good because I'm going to be doing another webinar about inclusion. And one of the techniques is about how you get the weaker students to help the stronger students. So maybe I'll answer that. You have to come back again to get a better answer.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Any additional answer from Susie you want to add?
I just think that refers back to something that Anna was talking about in the start of her webinar about creating a really safe and supportive learning environment. You know, we're a team in a classroom. I often say to people, think about it as an orchestra. You know, everybody can play an instrument. Everybody's got something to bring. You've all got special talents. You just need me to kind of generally conduct you. And I think if the students feel safe and happy and they know that it's okay to play with language, I think some of that fear of being able to speak and open their mouths goes away. That was one of the questions that popped up in the Q&A, Anna, about how do we encourage students who hesitate to talk because they're afraid of making mistakes. So I definitely think that exactly what you were saying about a supportive learning environment, knowing things about your learner, praise, recognition and encouragement, those are all really important things so that people know this is an experimental lab. We want you to make mistakes. We want you to play with language. You know, that's absolutely fine.
And I think it also goes back to the readiness for learning. So maybe in some lessons, some students are not ready to contribute. And because they don't speak doesn't mean that they're not learning something. So some students will sit silently for the whole lesson, but actually they're learning quite a lot. And maybe in 10 lessons time, they might speak more for the first time. And I think you have to wait for people. So think about how you learn your mother tongue. Children learn to speak at different speeds. And we have an unrealistic expectation of learners in the classroom. They come in day one and everyone has to produce something. Not everybody's ready to produce something. Maybe they would be more comfortable writing down, maybe just listening, other people participating. So I think that's also our problem, not their problem. And it can be about just waiting for people to be ready and giving them different ways of contributing, so that it's not always in front of a whole class with a big group. And that's also about understanding your learners, knowing their personality.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as well, giving the learners opportunities to contribute, as Anna said, you know, they may choose to contribute that lesson, they may choose not to, but I think it's up to us to know the class and to get a feel for, you know, when you've got those really chatty, outgoing, dominant students, that can be great to get a conversation going, and then balancing that with allowing opportunities for other people to be able to contribute. And so we can do that by maybe, you know, nominating a leader in a group so that, you know, one person can collect information while they're talking and a different person can choose to feedback to the teacher who's maybe more confident, or if there's a little group discussion going on, somebody else could be nominated to draw a picture of what's going on. So it doesn't always have to be a verbal contribution. And I think we have to be, as Anna said, really patient and think about the readiness for learning, and putting pressure on a student to contribute isn't going to help them lose their shyness or lose their fear. So I think we need to be really, really mindful of that.
I think that adds in also with how you monitor a class. If you are lucky and you can walk around your class, or if you're on a webinar and you can go into a breakout room, then you can see things. You can turn your camera off and try to monitor more discreetly. But if you're in a classroom, you can walk around. For example, you can walk around with a green pen and just put a green dot on somebody's paper and just say, that's something really great. I love that. When we do the feedback, I want you to share it. And then students are going to want that green dot on their thing, because and it might be a mistake. You put a green dot next to mistake. That's an amazing mistake. We're looking at that one. That's a good one. We want to share it. So thinking about going round or giving them a little piece of paper and just saying, I liked your idea. Please, will you tell everybody else about that, so that they can feel confident?
Yeah, I think those confidence is important. I wanted to draw you back to the needs analysis section.
Yeah, we went through that quite quickly.
And it's great because there's a lot of questions, a lot of interest around the needs analysis. So there's a range of questions. So just the first one is, do I have to do a needs analysis with my younger learners? And I think they're the things that you showed us about the fingerprint, or I popped in one of the suggestion boxes, maybe getting us to draw 5 of their favorite things might be more appropriate for the younger learners.
Definitely. I think also a really good thing with younger learners is when you get a paper plate and you can sort of do a pie chart. I'm just thinking, I've actually got a little whiteboard here. Here's one I had made earlier. If I can draw a paper plate quickly. So you've kind of got your paper plate, and on that plate you divide it into sections. And you can show that what the bigger sections are maybe the things they like doing most, or they like doing least, or it could be, it's a pie chart, so it could be whatever you want it to be. It could be, I find this really difficult, I'm not good at this. But also just, I think with children, just asking them, and you can put pictures of things and say, put your hand up if you like this or that. Because also when we work with younger learners, we have to remember that some of them can't read or write yet. They're still learning, so we need to use a lot of visuals, a lot of pictures. And as you said, Susie, I think the sort of craft aspect can be quite good.
Yeah, thinking about the needs analysis as well. There's a question from Irene about is interested in knowing more about her students and understanding the learners. She's worried that it's going to be difficult to teach because of the institution's fixed curriculum. So what are your thoughts on that?
You know what, I always say, this is what frustrates me when people say, oh, for example, I'm doing an exam class, I don't have time for this, I don't have time for that. We're talking about having time for humanity. You must have time for that. Using a student's name, there is always time to use a student's name. There is always 10 seconds at the beginning of a class to say good morning, what did you do? There are all of the, what did you do at the weekend? I think that these are small things. I've given you many ideas, many things that are coming up, but all of these things are things that you could do over an academic year. So lots of little bits. You can't collect all of the information unless you're very lucky and your school sends everything out in the holidays before you start and you arrive with the perfect information. This never happens. I think in 30 years teaching, I've never seen a teacher that said, I have everything ready to go on day one. You have to collect that information as you go along. And maybe some of the information you collect, you don't have time to use. You're going to give it to the next teacher. So I think these are little things. And I also would say that as teachers, we are more important than the institutions we work in, because those institutions are nothing without us. So don't be afraid to have conversations with leadership, with management, and ask for small changes. It's not difficult to put one extra column in a register to ask a student about their hobbies. And I'm very fortunate that I work with leadership a lot, and I work with head teachers, and head teachers are human beings, they're normal people. I think teachers need to be less afraid of people that manage them, and have a chat and just see if you can integrate small things over long periods of time, not lots of things all at once.
Thank you, Anna and Susie, for the great response for all the questions. I saw that we got a lot of questions both in Zoom and Facebook, but I'm aware of time that we have to end this first sessions. But I would like to remind for everyone that we're going to continue to the second sessions, which we will use the same link together with Susie Bridge, that we're going to explore about planning lessons and courses. It will be started at 3:15 using the same links. So if you're in Zoom at the moment, you don't need to leave the Zoom room. But before we end that, I would like to give or share some information regarding these webinars. So I would like to remind you that this webinars is a series that will remain until the 7th of March, and all the information about this will be shared through British Council official social medias, Peartree languages social medias, and also English Academy social medias. And about next week, we are going to have classroom management and the inclusive classroom as well. I would like to remind you to register yourself through the link provided here down on the posters. And to have your e-certificate for the first session, I would like to remind you to submit your feedback and download your e-certificate after you submitted your feedback through this link or by scanning the QR code provided on your screen. So once again, I would like to remind you that the second sessions will be started at 3:15 Jakarta time, and we are going to explore about planning courses and lessons with Susie Bridge later on. So stay here, don't go anywhere. We will be right back. See ya. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our second sessions of 21st Century English Teacher Express webinar series. Just now, we have explored the topic of understanding learners, and now we are going to explore the topic of planning lessons and courses. This webinar initiated by Press Council in partnership with Peartree Languages and English Academy powered by Guanggur. Before we continue to our the presentation, I would like to remind you about our housekeeping rules for this webinar. The session is being recorded and live streamed on British Council's Teaching English Asia Facebook. The attendee, you acknowledge that your comments may be recorded and we will press that. If you would like to ask questions, please type them in the Q&A box on Zoom or chat box on Facebook. At the end of the session, you will be given a link to complete a post-event survey. Link to download the certificate will be provided after you submit your feedback. Well, without any further ado, I would like to invite our trainer, Lucy Bridge, to deliver the session. Lucy, the virtual screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Great stuff. I'm very excited. It's lovely to see you all. I'm very pleased to see we have a couple of people from the New Santara Go project, which is lovely. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, am I up and running, Adi?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, super stuff. Great. Okay, yeah, so welcome everybody to the Planning Lessons and Courses seminar. So I'm Susie Bridges and I'm a very experienced teacher trainer. I've been working with non-native English teachers for a number of years now, and I'm really happy to be involved with the British Council projects and also doing some work with Peartree Languages. So as Anna mentioned, thinking about our continuing professional development as teachers and trainers, this is available on the British Council website, and the first rung of this kind of wheel is about planning. So Anna and I were talking and thinking about, you know, understanding learners and planning, and it's a bit like chicken and egg. Which comes first? You know, can you do any planning if you don't understand your learners? And, you know, does understanding learners help you plan better? Of course it does. So it's really great that these two sessions are sitting together. So this is where I'm pitching my session with you today. So there's an awful lot of information on the British Council website, which is super useful, and I really recommend that you check it out. And today I'm planning on covering how we can plan coherent and relevant lessons for our students, how we can look at material and think about useful aims, and also how we can select and exploit and sometimes also omit material. Sometimes it might be that the course book gives us too much, and so we can't fit it all in. So we have to sometimes make decisions about what we can do in class and maybe things that we can ask our learners to do at home. So there are obviously a number of different factors to consider when we're planning. And I usually ask myself a series of questions before I sit down to do any course planning. So things like the learners. So Anna has given us a brilliant grounding about understanding our learners and what we can do. So what age are they? What age are they? What personalities have they got? You know, why are they studying? What's their motivation? I also need to know about the length of my classes. Am I with the learners for 30 minutes or 60 minutes or somewhere in between, 45 minutes? Frequency of lessons is really important. Do I see them every day? Do I see them once a week? Do I see them twice a week? Because that's going to influence how much material I can cover in the time I've got available. Thinking about when is your English lesson? Are you first thing in the morning when they're kind of like just waking up, or maybe you've got some students who are bright and shiny? Is it after lunch, so you get the post-lunch slump when they're all feeling a little bit tired? Is it the last thing in the afternoon? You know, are you seeing them on a Friday? Are you seeing them on a Monday, or whatever the equivalent of that is in your country? And then also when you're planning your courses, thinking about the amount of material in the course book you've got to cover and the length of the semester. So some course books relate very closely to the semester, and maybe some schools are quite dictatorial in how fast they want you to teach or how slow they want you to teach. But maybe in other institutions, you've got a little bit more leeway. So you might need to consider, you know, if I've got 120 teaching hours of content, but I only see my students for, you know, 40 hours, then obviously there are some decisions that need to be made. And also thinking about, what do the learners already know? So if you have the ability to have a look in the data drop, as Anna mentioned, or communicate with teachers from the school that the learners had previously, maybe you can make decisions about, oh, well, I don't need to cover that because they did it last year, or, you know, or so on and so forth. So these are a number of questions that I think about when I'm planning my lessons and my courses. So I guess one of the most important things is definitely timing. You can't really plan a lesson, you can't really plan a course unless you know how long your classes are, how frequent you see the learners, and how much homework is expected. And again, I think this will depend on the age of your learners. If you've got older students or you're working with adults, then you can give them a little bit more autonomy and they can do a lot more work outside of the classroom, versus maybe working with younger learners when you have to manage what they can achieve. So this is a starting point for your planning. And as I mentioned, you might need to get rid of activities or make activities last longer according to where you're teaching, how you're teaching, and the needs of your school as well. So a good starting point is going to be the contents page. So this is a book that we use very commonly in teacher training courses when we're helping people who want to become English language teachers learn how to teach. So if we look at the contents page of this particular book, it's pitched at A2, so pre-intermediate. You can see that it's divided really nicely into different kinds of lessons. So grammar, vocabulary, also covers pronunciation. And if you just have a look as well at the page numbers, you get a sense of the fact that the units are pretty small. So just compare that with a book that I took thanks to the amazing Inda, who was one of my mentors on the New Santara Go project. So she gave me some information about sort of typical course books used over in Indonesia. And so I had a look at the contents page of this one. Look at this, Story of Writing, Chapter 6, Natural Disasters, page 26. That's 25 pages for one chapter. If you see your learners for an hour a week, there's no way you're going to get through 26 pages in 1 hour. It's just not going to happen. So course books like this are a little bit more useful because they give you an overview of exactly what's covered. So you can think about how you can plan appropriately. Whereas a book like this, you might need to have a look at it more carefully yourself so you can get a much clearer understanding of how to pace the material and what's important and maybe what's less important. So thinking about how we can map the course book to our lessons, I've done an example little timetable down here. So I'm imagining I'm seeing my group of learners 3 times a week, and I've got them for 2 lessons of 45 minutes and then a longer lesson of 60 minutes in the middle. So in chapter 8, if I actually look into this book in a bit more detail, it does give me a bit more information. And now I can see, okay, so there's reading that they need to do. There's some grammar on conditionals that they need to do. There's writing that they're going to need to do, and writing a story, and then some classwork. So if I'm thinking about how to plan chapter 8 to fit into just 3 lessons, I might need to decide, well, actually the writing can be done for homework. So we can do the reading together in the class. We can maybe cover the grammar together in the class, and I've chosen the longer lesson for that. Maybe your lessons are all the same duration, so that's not a luxury you have. And then maybe because they've been doing a lot of quiet work, so reading and grammar, it's really important that I try to balance that with one of the more productive skills, so speaking. So getting them to lift the story off the page, giving them a chance to activate any new vocabulary they've learned, helping them to have opportunities to use these conditional sentences. So if I was planning a week-long lesson to think about chapter 8, this is what it might look like for me. Okay, you also want to be thinking about variety as well as coherence. So coherence is how the lessons hang together. Are they completely standalone, separate lessons that don't need to be taught in any sequence? Or are they lessons that build and build and build? So it might be that, you know, I might do a vocabulary lesson and then I put the reading on top. And now they've got vocabulary and reading, I'm going to put the speaking on top. And now they feel really confident in the topic, I'm going to put the grammar on top. So these would be sequential lessons that build on a foundation. And it's really important that you have the first lesson in order for you to understand the second and the third lesson. Or it might be that the lessons are only linked by theme, by topic. So it might be that you've got a range of different lessons, but all on the topic of the environment, for example. Or it might be that the lessons are linked by skill. So I thought about maybe what a 4-week course might look like, given, again, my 3 times a week schedule. And I think it's really important, if you've got that freedom and flexibility, to think about how you can change up your week for the learners. So Anna talked a little bit about learning styles, learning preferences, and I feel it's really important to make sure that you deliver a variety of different activities to appeal to a variety of different learners. Some of your learners are going to love speaking, some might not be ready for speaking, or some might be a little bit quieter. Some might tolerate the speaking, but they thrive when they can work quietly by themselves on a reading activity or a grammar activity. Some students might be really super awake and switched on in the morning, and that's when you'll get the best out of them. Others, maybe you'll do better after lunch when they've had something to eat and a run around and they're a little bit more brain awake. So think about if you've got the freedom and flexibility to change your timetable. You know, maybe you don't always want to have reading first thing. Maybe sometimes you want to do a little bit of listening or change that up with a little bit of grammar. And I've also thought about balancing my skills across the week and across the course. If all of your lessons are reading, 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 or grammar, 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 you know, you need to think about what impact that's going to have on your learners. And even if the course book says it's a grammar lesson, there's nothing to stop you from making sure that there's lots of opportunities for the learners to take the language and start practicing it, so you can embed a speaking lesson on the end of a grammar lesson to make sure that your learners actually have some time to talk. And then making good decisions about what you can give your learners for homework. So it may be that we do all of the preparation on the vocabulary, on the grammar, we talk about ideas, we brainstorm a plan for the writing, but the writing itself takes place out of the classroom at home. It might be that, you know, there's quite a hefty reading coming up and you think that explaining the vocabulary might take a long time, or that the slower readers might be disadvantaged because the faster readers will rip through the questions really quickly. So you might want to consider maybe giving the reading as a task for the learners to do at home. That way they can use dictionaries, they can use translators, they can take their time over vocabulary, they can have a look at the questions in advance, and then you can think about how you can add value to that lesson in the classroom itself. So we call this in the UK flipped learning. Some of you may have heard of this. For some of you, it might be a new term, but it's thinking about what happens out of class as well as what happens in the class. And if you are tight on time, flipped learning is a great way to maximize your materials, but giving the learners autonomy and freedom to do some work at home. Some learners will thrive in a group setting or working with a partner. Other learners might prefer to work quietly by themselves. So for flipped learning, some of the preparation for the lesson might take place before the actual class begins. So they will, for example, I'll just skip ahead to this slide. For example, it might be that I ask them to read the text before they get to the class. Okay, so I see them on a Friday and I say, okay, your homework over the weekend is to have a look at the story on page 60. You can use your dictionaries and your translators, have a look at the questions, and that's your homework. So they're fully prepared before they come into class. And then during the class, you can obviously get them to chat over their answers together. And maybe that gives students who didn't do the homework time to crib some answers off their partners, off their classmates, off their friends. So you can check over the answers together in class, and then you can refer them back to the text, and then maybe help them understand the text in a little bit more detail if they got things wrong or they didn't understand questions. Or if they bring any questions or problems they had about maybe vocabulary. So maybe there were some words they couldn't understand, or even with a translator, it wasn't very clear. So you can cover the vocabulary during the classroom time together. But the preparation, the bulk of that is done before the class takes place. And then the processing, so the learners being able to understand what's going on. Again, sometimes we might have high expectations and expect our students to get it while we are in the class teaching it. And for many students, this doesn't happen. So the processing might need to take place after the class, when they can sit and they can think about what they've been asked to do. Maybe they can go back and they can read the text again with a deeper understanding. And maybe you can give them a post-reading extension activity to really help them deepen their understanding. So that could be, you know, writing a text or writing a response to the reading or whatever it might be. So another example of flipped learning might be connected with grammar. So thinking back to my original, I had grammar in my lesson on Tuesday that I was planning to present and teach everything about conditionals. But maybe if I do flipped learning, they do the preparation for the grammar before they get into the classroom. So I ask the students to read the grammar rules before the class. Maybe ask them to have a look at the activities in the course book before the class. So their minds are primed and they're ready, so that when we get to class, they've got really helpful, really sensible questions that I can then be really helpful with. So troubleshooting grammar problems will be how we spend our time, as well as providing learners with plenty of opportunity to practice using the language. So when you're learning grammar, obviously understanding the rules is important. Doing what we call controlled practice, so filling in the gaps to have a go at, you know, using the written form of the grammar is really important. But those are the kinds of things that could be done outside of the classroom. Whereas inside the classroom, the learners might be better served by getting them to do lots and lots of speaking practice and pronunciation practice, particularly with conditionals, because they're quite chunky bits of grammar with 2 different clauses, some contractions, some difficult things to say. And then you might want to follow that up if you've got 3 lessons with them of revision of what they learned, maybe a class discussion of what they learned. Maybe you could ask them in the flipped learning classroom to prepare some ideas, and then they can bring those ideas into the classroom so they're all ready and able to participate. So the flipped learning classroom is something that you might want to experiment with, depending on what level you're working with and how much material you're able to get through in a lesson compared to how much material you've got to cover in the semester. It's also really important when you're planning to think about how you can build in revision, recycling, and then give the learners time to evaluate and assess themselves. So these days, lots of course books do a really great job of giving the learners the opportunity to evaluate and assess themselves. So this was taken out of the Bahasa Inggris book. So at the end of the unit, the students are asked about the most interesting thing they learned, about what they enjoyed, something they want to find out more about, and something that they found maybe a little bit difficult or they'd like to work harder on. So this is a great way for the learners to self-evaluate. And obviously as the teacher, you can monitor and be part of that and then be making some notes to help you in your planning for future lessons. And then similarly in the cutting edge book, we have can-do statements. So at the end of the unit, the student gets the tick, okay, I've covered the unit, I can do this, I can do that, I can do the other. So building in regular revision time is really important so that you can check that learning is taking place and that your learners are progressing at the rate that you need them to, given the length of the course and the amount of material that you're covering. Okay, so this was taken from one of the books pitched at younger learners. Okay, so when English rings a bell, again, brilliant. Inda was able to alert me to the fact that this is a really core textbook. This was a little activity that I've just taken out, and you can see that it's meant to be a reading activity. So I would be thinking about how can I exploit this material so maybe reading is not the only thing that it does for me. So if I'm short on time, it might be that I need to mesh my lessons together. So maybe have a reading and a grammar lesson. So that's what this kind of lesson looks like for me. So as a teacher trainer, a kind of lesson that we talk about is text-based presentation, where new grammar, new language or new vocabulary is presented through a story or a text, and it could be reading or it could be listening. And then the learners are maybe asked some questions to understand it, and then we move more into the language. So looking at this activity, it could be that we could use grammar and just think about present simple for when we're giving factual information. Also, because we've got some examples in the text, it could be also about teaching comparative and superlative structure. And you wouldn't necessarily choose to use the words comparative and superlative with your learners. Sometimes I find that using grammatical terminology just overly complicates things. So we wouldn't necessarily say, now we're going to learn all about superlative grammar. No, like let's talk about elephants. Okay, we've got a family of elephants. Which one's the mom? Which one's the dad? Which one's the baby? Are they the same age? Are they different ages? Okay, one is older, one is younger, and the one at the top is the oldest. So we'd be using pictures to think about how we can teach the grammar rather than just go, here is the grammar, learn about the rules. Maybe they've done lots of grammar and I'm thinking, oh, do you know what? They need a break from grammar. Maybe I'm going to use this information in my textbook and just teach adjectives instead. I've got good, I've got intelligent, I've got long. Okay, and it might be that I want to springboard this into a lesson about animals. Or it could be that I've done my grammar, I've done my vocabulary, and now I want to work on some skills. So I could be using the model of the text to then get the students to write their own text. And it could be factual or it could be descriptive writing. So tell me about your favorite animal or tell me about your pet, perhaps. Or it could be that I am just going to use it as a reading lesson or I want to use it to help them with their speaking. So when we're thinking about planning lessons and courses, we need to really be mindful of what do the learners need? And I'm mindful that you're working to a curriculum, but do your learners need 4 reading lessons in a row? Do they need to have grammar every single week? Or is it more about how they can think about using the grammar in a speaking lesson? So thinking about what your learners need might give you a little bit more license to be freer with your materials. What can the learners do at home? So how can you save time in the lesson? And what can the learners do at home so that when you're in the lesson, you can really add value, that the learners aren't, you know, sort of sitting quietly doing some reading, which is something that they may as well do at home. Okay, so some things to think about when you're planning lessons and courses. So in terms of planning lessons, there's a lot of information out there that is really helpful. And I've put a couple of references to links to the British Council website, which has lots of information, and also a couple of websites where there are some free resources. And also you can pay a subscription and get some webinars and information on planning different types of lesson. So my assumption would be that as teachers, you might know the difference between receptive skills, which is speaking and listening, and productive skills, which is speaking and writing. And there's different kinds of lesson frameworks according to what you're teaching. looking in the course books used in Indonesia, I can't speak for Gaza or lots of the other countries that you guys come from, but lots of your course books seem to be structured in a way that follows a really sensible lesson plan. So it's obviously reducing the amount of work that you as the teacher have to do. But one of the challenges that I'd like to encourage for you as a post-webinar task is, if you wanted to have a go at writing a lesson plan, imagine you've just delivered a reading lesson on a topic that was suitable for your learners, and then have a think about how you could exploit the same material to try and get some vocabulary out of it, and then to encourage the learners to extend the topic, so to talk more about environment or animals or cooking, whatever it might be, and really work on practicing their productive skills. So it's a whistle-stop tour today, as Nikki mentioned at the outset. But there's a lot of great information on the British Council Teaching English website. So in terms of the continuing professional development, which is that wheel that Anna and I showed you, there are 12 professional practices to have a look at. And there's a lot of really helpful information on planning lessons and courses. So you can see just by the number of bullet points, the number of different activities that are drawn to your attention on the British Council website when we're planning. So I'd like to thank you very much for listening and show you that the slides that you'll have access to are going to be available to you. So there's information that you can read on lesson planning. These are the websites that I mentioned with some free resources. Joga Conga is a great colleague of mine, an amazing teacher trainer. And she's got an amazing website called ELT Training with lots of free stuff. But it's also worth maybe thinking about a subscription if you're serious about your own development, or if your school can maybe pay for that for you. And there's information on the Gallery Teachers website all about teaching productive skills and receptive skills. So I hope that you go and check those out, and you'll see me and Anna and Nikki on the Gallery Teachers website giving you lots of really helpful information. Okay, great. Let's have a chat.
Hi, Susie. There's a few questions in the box which I've sort of answered, but I think we could unpick in a bit more depth. The first one is thinking about, is it okay if we give the same assignment, I guess, or task or exercise before and after the class? So you can guess what I've said, but let's see what you're going to say.
I don't know. My guess would be no.
Oh, okay. So I'm saying the opposite, but go on. You say that this is good because.
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with revising and recycling, because that's what it builds into, definitely.
Yeah.
But I would also think about how you can encourage your learners to be challenged and motivated, and maybe give them something different to do when they feel comfortable with the material. So I would guess either or, I think is a perfectly acceptable way to go for that one.
I think you're going for like a parallel task, then maybe like you give them a task, they then do the lesson with you, and then you give them a similar but not exactly the same task for the variety.
Yes.
I'm also saying, I think, yes, in that this goes back to being ready to learn. Before the class in flipped learning, they might not know anything about the vocab or the grammar. So you give them a task and they feel they're not doing that well. So it creates that gap, that need, which you as a teacher hopefully fill during the lesson, and then afterwards they might come back. I say this personally because I'm doing a maths course at the moment and I'm not very good at maths, and I'm actually quite pleased to be given a second chance at the same thing, surprisingly, because then I can show that I'm not as silly as I thought I was, and actually now I can do it. So but I think, yeah, that's quite useful. The next question, which I've sort of asked, is homework considered a formative assessment? And I think maybe you'd agree that if the problem with homework is how many students have you got, are you actually able to physically see it, mark it, collect up scores, or collect up subjective comments, in which case, yes, it could be, but I don't know what your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, that is the challenge of homework. If you are in a class of 30 people, it's managing your own workload as well. But if you're going through answers together in the class, that kind of takes the marking away from you a little bit. All of the preparation for the learners just means they've had time to have a look and a think about the answers. So yes, it can be formative assessment. I think it can also be summative assessment as well. At the end of an activity, at the end of a lesson, you give them some homework, like let's check how much you know about conditionals. So the homework could be a way of checking that you have understood everything that I've talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one I think is definitely worth I sort of started to unpick. So they said the problem is in my school, it's difficult for students to learn independently if not accompanied by a teacher. How to overcome this?
Yeah.
So I think in the first instance, maybe we can talk a little bit about teacher-centeredness in teaching and well, you start. I'll pick up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to depend on the age and the context for sure. But I definitely think that learner training is really important. We need to teach our learners how to learn. And I think this is particularly true if they are young learners. They need to learn how to, sit down and study as well as run around and chat. But I do think that we can introduce that from the beginning. And we work in a context where, as Anna said, it's maybe less about the teacher and it's more about the teacher facilitating what the learners can do. So I feel if you're able to, having a balance of teacher-centeredness versus learner autonomy is a great way to encourage your learners to be challenged, make your institution happy because you're still delivering what you've been told to deliver, but also thinking about preparing your learners for life. If they are going to become lifelong learners, not just lifelong language learners, they need to be given the skills and the opportunity to train themselves in how they can work and how they can improve themselves without a teacher always fully being present in the room. And even if you are fully present in the room, if you've got 35 kids to get around, there are going to be times when the learners are going to have to learn to work without you. You can't be at every single student station for the entire 45 minutes of the class.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that's used quite a lot in primary schools here is, well, firstly, when a student asks you a question, you can just throw it back and say, well, you tell me. And then there's the idea that we use sometimes, which is 3 before me. And the 3 is that the student tries to find an answer themselves, because sometimes with a little prompt, just the teacher asking the right question, they have actually already got the answer. So they're just not quite ready to give it. So that's the first person before you. The second one is ask a friend. So can somebody else help in the class? And the third one is ask an expert, like Google a course book, the verb table in the back. And then if you didn't get an answer from yourself, from your friend, or from Google, that's when you come to the teacher. So 3 before me can be a way of developing with children that idea of being a little bit more autonomous and independent in their learning.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Because, there is a lot of pressure on the teacher to be all things to all people all the time. And I think we have to take that off the table as just unrealistic, if we're not going to burn out at the end of every single day. But giving our students the tools to become more autonomous, to become more inquisitive, to become more curious, to become more independent. I think these are, 21st century skills. And definitely it's going to encourage more communication and collaboration in the classroom, which is great for team building, great for rapport, great for practicing, language. And even if they're doing that in L1, as long as they're on task, I think as the teacher, you know your learners best. And it's up to you to make a decision about whether or not you allow that kind of chatter to take place if it's clear that what they're doing in L1 is actually really helping and supporting one another.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me play devil's advocate that when you were doing the planning part and you're looking at your week, the sort of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or maybe it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you were thinking about what you could move out of the actual lesson time, you're looking about flipped learning. You talked about the fact that you would maybe consider putting writing in as homework. So being the devil's advocate, is writing always going to be homework?
No, not at all, because then it means you've got to mark it. So just purely being selfish, I wouldn't always give writing as the homework, because obviously if you've asked the students to do something like writing, it's different from reading and vocabulary and grammar, because there are right answers that you can check in the class together, which is less time consuming. But if you've asked the learners to put their heart and soul and their effort and energy and ideas into writing, I think it's only fair to reward them with some kind of comment or some kind of, personalized feedback. So I would definitely make sure that writing wasn't always the homework, just because, in terms of time management, I need to balance my time. And also, thinking about what the learners might enjoy doing for homework. And homework doesn't always have to be, a grammar activity. It could be, try and find a video online. It could be, watch a cartoon and have a think about how many animals you can see. We can get creative with the homework for sure.
Yeah, and I think this is where if you've got access to being able to do things online, and maybe you're doing lessons via Zoom, it's great to also be able to send your homework via a little video where you share your screen and explain what you want them to do, and maybe give them a choice of things to do to look at as well. I was thinking also about talking about flipped learning. I think is a really great thing, isn't it? Because getting them to prepare something beforehand. So it means that you've got to think of planning as that cycle, that you're always sort of a day or a week ahead, depending when you see your students. So you're teaching them on the Friday before you're giving them some homework that feeds in. What happens, Susie, if you give them that flipped work and they don't do it?
That's always a danger. And I think that's why it's really important to allow some collaborative time in the class when the lesson starts. And again, this comes from understanding your learners, knowing your learners, and maybe thinking about classroom management, which we're going to cover next week. So how can you group your students? So, you know, the ones who have done it, or the ones that you feel very strongly are most likely to have done it, can maybe be paired with the people that you think might have had more difficulties or might have struggled, or, you know, maybe need that extra support. You know, we definitely believe as teacher trainers that peer-to-peer teaching is, you know, as important in the classroom as teacher to student training. And peer-to-peer teaching, when the learners help each other, is amazing, because if I'm the stronger learner and I'm explaining something to my classmates, that embeds the information even more clearly in my mind, because I'm having to explain it in a way that somebody else understands it. And so obviously it's a win-win situation, because the person I'm talking to is hopefully going to get a better insight because it's been explained to them. And certainly my experience on teacher training courses is when they're explaining to each other, they often do it at a level that is more appropriate, more suitable. You know, sometimes I forget that my level of teaching, I've got 25 odd years of experience now. I forget what it's like to be a bit frightened and a bit intimidated and a bit scared. So having somebody else explain it to you who's at a similar wavelength or a similar level can be such a valuable resource. And again, kids can be encouraged to do that to each other. It doesn't have to be reserved for older teens and adults.
Absolutely. There's quite a few more questions coming in, so I think someone have to sort of just answer directly, and then we can maybe unpick a couple. If you were given a 45-minute class and you have to present target language, vocab, and introduce a new topic, how would you plan the 45-minute class? I know that Susie's probably going to say what I say, particularly a lot of you teach younger learners. I would start with your topic or your theme. Almost certainly start with something that's going to get their attention, whether that is an object, a video, a visual, and build up and have your language in something, maybe in a reading, in a listening, pull it out, think about that. So I think planning that 45 minutes, also I think with younger learners, 45 minutes, I would always start the first 5 minutes is going to be a revision of something I did the day before, and maybe 10 minutes because it might be the day before and the week before. And the last part of the class is always going to be something. So I think with younger learners, there's that sort of cycle, but I think that, you know, thinking about repetition is really good for us because it reduces our planning time. So that would be one thing I would sort of say as a quick answer to that. We've got a couple of longer questions here. One's about summative assessment. The person's thinking that it can only be done at the end of the semester, and formative is the one that we do at the end of every chapter or subchapter. So is it something we can observe for homework? So I think, do you want to give a little definition about summative, formative?
So formative is as we're going, yeah, and summative is at the end. So I mean, I guess it depends on how you're looking at a book. You know, you might consider that the assessment review at the end of a chapter, you might consider formative because you've still got 6 more chapters to go, or you might consider it summative because it's the end of a chapter. So I wouldn't be too like pernickety about summative. Yeah.
And I think the key thing to just pick up here is the fact that it's really useful when you're planning to plan assessment. So for people that do the Cambridge Delta, there's a module where you have to do sort of basically look at planning, planning something. And we're looking at planning a course, and we expect to see the timetable with the sessions, but also where the assessment points are. And that would be a mixture of those informal little tests that you're going along, the formative bits and the more formal, perhaps summative assessment.
Yeah, definitely. As Anna mentioned, sorry to interrupt Anna, but I definitely think that, like, daily recycling or, weekly recycling, that's a test. We're just not going to tell the students to test ever. We often use vocabulary games and activities to test our learners' knowledge, and they don't need to know that it's a test. As a teacher, when students are communicating with you, you're always listening for, okay, they still haven't quite got that yet. Maybe I need to come back to that next week, or wow, that's much better than they did like 2 weeks ago. So every interaction with your class is always about revising, recycling, consolidating, evaluating and assessing. So as well as the more formal and traditional, end of chapter review or end of semester exam, there's also your daily or weekly interactions with the learners when you're collecting assessment and evaluation information.
And that's the kind of thing you want to be jotting down on your register or on a notepad somewhere of, what's happening. A couple of other little questions. One, I can just answer, where can I get past papers to practice? For Cambridge exams? Basically on the Cambridge website, they have a link to a page called resources. You can click on the resources for teachers, and then you put in the, A1, B2, or the name, starters, flyers, whatever it might be, or Cambridge First. And there's a lot of information there. There's always past papers, there's always a handbook. A question for somebody asking if you can pop up in a minute the flipped learning slide again, that maybe they would like to see that. I think also I like this, after giving homework, is it necessary to check about the homework? I would say also that thinking more about whole class assessment and whole class feedback, what we try to do a lot now is reduce marking. So a teacher might take in 40 books, they look at them all, and you're not going to correct every mistake. You're going to look for some common errors within those 40 books. And then you come back to class and say, everybody had this particular problem with this conditional phrase, or this came up. So I think about reducing the amount of marking you're doing. But yeah, thanks. So Susie,
working smart, not working hard, right? It's because there will be commonalities, of course there will, particularly if you guys are working in monolingual contexts. You have an advantage in a way because you already know what the mistakes are going to be, because you've likely made them yourself on your own English learning journey, for sure.
And we're looking, so that flipped one again, I think, this is about lesson planning. You're planning the pre-work. And often if you join a webinar, this one didn't have one, but sometimes there is pre-work. I know that I sit on quite a lot of things, and I'm set into little tasks to get me ready to make more use of my live time on the webinar or in the lessons. So I think that's what it's about. Another little question in the chat, which I see Nikki's answered, which is nice as well. I think somebody asking us to send a link to planning and preparing the perfect lesson. I think I would add to that. Nikki said, obviously, there's no such thing. I think that the thing is that, there absolutely is no such thing. The perfect lesson is something that is really got something very specific for your learners. But I think I would go back to that idea of the cyclical approach with particularly younger learners. Having a lesson framework is very useful. So for me, when I'm teaching children, I always start a lesson with a starter mat. So it's just a little A4 page, and it's got some revision things from previous lessons. Then I've got my kind of core content, and then I've got a kind of review. And if I'm using a flip chart, either in the lesson or online, I like to end a lesson by going back to the start of the flip chart and pulling out a few things and recapping, so that we're constantly refreshing. So that can be something good. And Susie's put in, she's got productive and receptive skills as well in another webinar. You can see in the chat box. I think there is a lot of material out there, but would you say, Susie, there isn't the perfect lesson?
Not at all. And that's why, obviously, because there is so much out there, on the one hand, that's great. And on the other hand, it's terrible, because where do you go? So the two websites I've given you are very carefully chosen, because I know that Joga Conga is an incredibly professional teacher trainer who's been in our industry for probably longer than Anna and I combined together. And the quality of her material is amazing. It's initially pitched at people who are doing a teacher training qualification. So it's really accessible for everybody. And then Gallery Teachers, a little bit like the British Council is doing here, it's curating a panel of experts in their field and then offering you something that is, hopefully really useful. So I know, because I delivered it, and I know that Anna and Nikki have also delivered on Gallery Teachers, that's a really good webinar to watch. because that will give you a rundown of how to teach a productive skills lesson and how to teach a receptive skills lesson. Otherwise, you can find yourself wading through the internet for weeks and weeks and weeks and still never find exactly what you're looking for. So take perfect off the table and have a think about, you know, what can you realistically do in the time available, and maybe just have a look at the slides that we've suggested, and experiment. You know, I would say with planning, you know, the more you do it, the easier it gets, the faster you get, the better you get, and the better able you are to look at a book and go, okay, that's going to be useful. Maybe I can integrate that already, that I can leave out, or that I can give for homework. So just keep doing it and talk with your colleagues. You know, we've got teacher Padlets available, we've got teacher communities available. So talk to each other, because, you know, you guys are all in the field, you're all working, and it might be that, you know, you've got people who can share lesson plans that already exist that you might find quite useful. I know Anna and I find it quite difficult to work from existing lesson plans. We'd rather just create something from scratch, but lots of teachers prefer to have something to work from rather than nothing to work from. So yeah, definitely sharing resources can be a great way to get better fast.
I would also say some of these questions about what it looks like. We've got other webinars coming up, and certainly my one is going to be about inclusion, and we'll look at sort of how you can add some flexible planning, some stages for different kinds of learners as well. So perhaps we'll come back to that. But I think we're pretty much at time now, Susie. So I don't know if there are any. Should we hand back to Addy?
Yeah, thank you very much, Susie and Anna, for a very rich and deep insight in terms of finding, understanding learners and courses. Well, I still we have some minutes. There's one question that might be you might need or want to answer it. We got the questions from Facebook. The question is, can you give a more interesting ways to make adult learners learning English faster? Most of my students above 30 years old, they are employed class, easily forget what they have memorized in the previous lessons. So I need to remind them again, again, and again. So what's kind of solution that you may address to
I
this?
think that relates back to what Anna was saying about maybe making your materials relevant and personalized. You know, rather than taking things from a course book, if your learners are interested in finding a job, maybe, you know, think about getting some internet adverts and using those as a reading lesson, maybe setting up a role play activity. So maybe covering question formation as your grammar point, and then putting it all together in a role play situation where your learners can take it in turns to be interviewer and interviewee. So I definitely think that, you know, Anna's webinar on understanding your learners is a really great way to think about motivating your adult learners for sure.
Anna, do you want to add on that?
No, I absolutely agree with what Susie's just said. Yeah, no, 100%.
And ask them, you know, I think as well, I think, you know, again, thinking back to what Anna said about teacher-centeredness, you know, sometimes in different contexts, there's this feeling that, you know, we are in control, we are the leader. You know, remember that your learners have talents and ideas and opinions, and why not ask them and say, okay, you know, we've got a couple of sessions coming up. Are there any topics that you're particularly interested in, or any topics that you'd really like to learn more about? Or, you know, was there a topic that we whizzed through that actually you want to go back and rediscover? And I think having that, you know, that creativity, allow yourself to be a bit flexible, and not be afraid as well of creating lessons. And again, this goes back to time management. If you've got a course book, of course, you want to make sure that you're using the course book, particularly if the course book is the curriculum. But if you've got the freedom and flexibility, there's a wealth of information available online. And a lot of learners respond really well to authentic materials. So, you know, again, thinking about flipped learning, you know, go away and read this article online about X, Y, and Z. And then when we come back, we're going to have this great class discussion, and I'm going to feed in some vocabulary to help and support you. So I think, you know, use the classroom as a dialogue to find out what interests and motivate your learners. And as much as you can, try and be aware of that, being, you know, bearing in mind that you can't be all things to all people all the time, and that's okay.
Yeah, and you can build up with authentic materials as well, can't you? I think if you think it might be a lot of time to go and find something, but if you can use it again
and again,
another group, and maybe when you use it the second time, you say, this is what people, the first group said last time, do you agree? And you're starting to create a bank of people's opinions and things. I think I very rarely create a tailor-made lesson that I'm not able to then adapt and reuse. I don't think I've got any lessons anymore that are just lessons I think, oh, I used that once and I've never used it again since. That was a lot of time unnecessary. spent unnecessarily. So yeah, I think recycling is really good.
Well, thank you, Anne.
No, I think Nikki's. Oh, Nikki, we can't hear you. Can we?
Yeah.
Can we hear Nikki? We still can't hear Nikki, unfortunately. Oh, she's talking, but we can't hear her.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Nikki. Sorry.
Anybody lip read?
Maybe
Oh,
because
not yet.
your earphone.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
there you go. Yes.
Yeah.
On that point about using authentic materials as well, and being able to recycle materials, because I think sometimes for teachers, particularly new teachers, who would like to stick to something very prescriptive, and perhaps we can have a look at putting some more prescriptive methods into the slides. But I think one of the things that can happen is that you can have a bit of overwhelm because you end up with so many materials and you don't really know how to collect them. So what I would suggest is to think about a way, find a tool that makes it possible for you to collect materials so that when you want to access them again, you can access them quickly. And I would say that there are lots of digital tools out there. Now we're going to have a digital tools session the week after next with Joe Dale, but there are lots and lots of ways that you can collate your materials online. So I'm thinking about things like Padlet, which we've got a Padlet running. So we have a Padlet running alongside this series. Also, there is a tool called Wakelet, which is also very good for making collections of materials that you can then also share with your learners with just one click. So the learners themselves don't need to have an account. You can simply collect a collection of materials. That could be TED Talks, it could be podcasts, it could be links, and you can very, very easily pull these together around different topics and then simply share them with your learners with one click. And this is a great way to spark, so I'm going to use that word spark that Anna used in her talk, to spark a lot of interest in your learners, and to also give them access to a huge range of materials that you've just collated, you haven't had to actually design. And then on top of that, when you are teaching another class a year later, you then have these collections of materials ready to roll. So you can perhaps just share those at the start of a course and just simply tweak them, make small adjustments so that you don't have that overwhelm. Because I know, for example, for myself, I love creating materials. A lot of my lessons are completely bespoke. I love getting under the skin of what the learners actually want to learn and then making lessons around that. But it's incredibly time consuming. Whereas, and a lot of the time is often trying to retrieve things you already know you have. So, oh, I knew I had that lesson somewhere. I knew I had that link. I knew I had that webinar. So if you've got that somewhere in one solid place, ready to go every single time, it's going to save you a lot of time. And it's also going to help you to really personalize your lessons going forward. Also, don't forget about things like Google Drive, Google Classroom, Jamboards, all of these sorts of tools that can really help make things a lot more student-centered.
Yeah, I just also want to pick up on overwhelm that Nikki mentioned. I saw earlier there's a question from a fresh out of the oven teacher, and I just really want to make sure that you are not overwhelmed, because when you're given a course book, normally the course book is perfectly fine and there's nothing wrong with using the course book. And I think we should be encouraged to use the course book, because yes, developing materials can be time consuming. In the first year or two of your teaching, get to know the course book and get to know your learners. And then when you're on your second go round, you'll automatically start making changes or making omissions or making additions, because you've now picked up that information and that experience that's going to support and help you moving forward. But when you're a newly qualified teacher, I really hope that nobody's going to ask you to, create a 25-week course from scratch, or make sure that you have to write every single lesson plan from the beginning, because that will cause a lot of overwhelm. And reach out to your teaching community if you are feeling overwhelmed, because I think it's really important that you draw on other colleagues for support. And I think a lot of teachers are always kind of like, I'm going to struggle through, I'm going to push through, it's going to be fine. And certainly in the UK and in the Western world, you know, burnout is really common in teachers. And so I would really encourage you to, you know, to go at a pace that is suitable for you. And if one lesson plan a week, doing something new feels like a challenge, that's good enough. If you're super speedy on digital technology and you think that collating materials, as Nikki has mentioned, is for you, that's good enough as well. But know your own limits. Of course, you know, be encouraged to step outside your comfort zone. And by attending these webinars, you're already doing that because you want to learn new things. But don't be afraid to do what's in the book, because by doing what's in the book, you'll learn, you know what, next time I'm not going to do that because it was boring or it was time consuming or it was difficult, or they could have done it at home, you know. So I just want to make sure that you're taking the pressure off yourself if you're a newly qualified teacher, by, you know, using the resources given to you and speaking to your colleagues and your you know, your community around the world.
Well, thank you, Susie, Nikki, and Anna, for the insight of using the authentic materials. Well, I'm aware of time, so again, thank you very much to all our speakers for today's sessions. And I would like to remind everyone that before we end this webinar, that this series will be held starting from today, 21st February, next week on the 28th, and the week after on the 1st of March and on the 7th of March. Well, in each day, we are going to have two sessions, which will be started at 2 p.m. and there will be 15-minute breaks in between of the sessions. And the second session in each day will be started at 3:15 p.m. Jakarta time. And I would like to encourage everyone here in the room and as well on Facebook that to register for the next sessions, you may access our the registration link through the link provided in the slide. So by clicking this link, you are able to choose which webinars or which sessions that you would like to attend based on the topic you are interested in. Well, once again, thank you very much, Susie, Anna, and Nikki for the input for today's sessions. And finally, I would like to encourage everyone to give feedback for these sessions. And after you submit your feedback, you may download your certificate. I would like also to remind everyone that the certificate that we provided is a blank certificate, but it will allow you to write your own name on that certificate by clicking one of the assigned under the certified name. You will able to write your own name on that certificate. So once again, thank you very much everyone for your and for attending these sessions, and I'll see you next week at the same thing. So bye bye.